You're listening to the 14th Source for all geeky and nerdy news and discussion, which means that you're listening to a podcast.
For all intents and purposes.
I am D. Bethel.
And I'm Andrew Asplund.
And we are your two overeducated, codependent nerd hosts, bringing you the things that we like to talk about, but filtered through inquisitive and critical lenses in the episode for Friday. February 10th, actually.
Yes, February
2023.
10th. So I have a little bit of anxiety.
Why's that?
I was at work the other day, and one of my coworkers said, like, oh, yeah, I saw you have a podcast. I started listening to it. And I'm like, oh, God damn it.
And you're fired.
I was like, get out of my office. It's just weird when, like, you know, like in a professional environment, someone finds out you do this thing and they're like, oh, it's about nerd stuff. And you're like, yeah, okay, we're done.
Have you met me? Yeah. It can be weird. Like when the news got covered about Long John being in development, all my coworkers were like, hey, Hollywood, are you going to leave us behind? I'm like, dude, one, the guy that comes up with the idea never gets rich. Two, leave me alone.
Actually,
not really leave me
calling
alone.
you Hollywood.
Hey, Hollywood. I'm like,
Hollywood.
I've met none. You good best friends with Chris Pine? I've never met the man. Yeah. But actually, speaking of awkward relationships, I hate to tell it, our listeners, because you probably heard, we lost our sponsorship with Kyron Silva of Taurus Comics and Four Tales Podcast.
I'm so sad.
No, it was my fault. I have to say it. We didn't talk about this in the weekly meeting, but the reason was, as it says here, extravagant use of funds. Listen, we got a big influx of money from him. I'm like, this is a great time to market the podcast. I thought it was a good idea, but like the manufacturer I was working with kind of screwed up. Listen, I was going to have just open air advertisement. So I ordered this big balloon and I was going to sail it over the United States so we could advertise the show. At 60,000 feet, that's a reasonable height. It was much bigger than I expected.
Like 3 buses.
It had a payload just full of audio equipment to blast our podcast over the United States, but they forgot to print our logo on the balloon. And let's just say it's not in the air anymore. And
thanks to the dutiful people of Wisconsin or Montana.
But hey, yeah. So we lost our sponsorship and we're just back to us being the idiots that we are. Some things never change.
Well, it's good.
But things do change a lot. And in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, there was a big change. Gosh, when was it? I make it sound exciting. It was actually very sad when Chadwick Boseman died.
Yes.
And changed kind of the plans in a lot of ways for the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Right. So sad they made a movie about it.
I mean, and that's the thing. More than anything, it changed the plans, I'm sure, for what was going to be Black Panther 2. Mm-hmm. And so they made, instead, Wakanda Forever, which was just recently released, I believe last week, on Disney+. So That means Andrew and I could finally watch it.
Because we're so cutting edge.
Yep. So cutting edge that we want to dull all of our edges by just staying home and not leaving the house. We watched Black Panther. Is it Black Panther : Wakanda Forever, or is it just Wakanda Forever?
Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. That's the most recent film. As of right now, I say that because actually in a week it will be the second most recent film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Yeah, with Ant-Man and Wasp: Quantumania. Well, before we kind of get into the movie, what was your kind of when it came out in theaters? What kind of information were you getting about it? Were you getting a sense of this sounds like a mess? This sounds interesting. This sounds like, I don't know. What was your kind of, what kind of impression were you getting from the movie when it came out?
All I heard was commentary about how they may have digitally altered one actor's, reduced, what's his name's trousers, I guess. Let's say that.
Bulge, I heard.
They
reduced his bulge.
Yeah, right. No, I'm sorry. I'm specifically returning to Tenoch Huerta, the actor who played, as is revealed in the movie, Namor.
Namor?
That's what I heard. I was like, oh, what is this? People saying did they digitally reduce his little his little sexy underpants? I don't know. That's what I heard.
So I always tuned into the discourse,
to the stuff that matters.
It was interesting because for me, I guess I'll tell you what I was hearing, and what I was hearing was actually kind of confusing. Not that like, oh, I don't understand what's going on, but it's a long movie, and obviously they lost their lead actor, and it was just packed to the gills with characters and a lot of new characters. And I was getting the sense that people were thinking it was like an unfocused film, that it was kind of like all over the place and maybe just more of like a, we need to hit the reset button here on this property because we lost our main actor. I don't know about you. We didn't talk about our respective feelings about it before recording. For me, the opposite is true. I think this movie is an incredible and interesting entry into the MCU. To me, it really feels more than like almost any other movie that has been in this universe. It felt like an Empire Strikes Back to me, where it's like this incredible middle chapter that does a lot of work moving that original movie forward, but mostly like just world building and creating a really interesting and varied world, and doing a lot of work to set up what comes next, and just doing a lot of things that Marvel movies don't tend to do.
So I think for me, it's interesting. As you're speaking, I was thinking like, oh, I agree with that. Oh, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. I think for me, I actually did think it was a bit of a mess.
Interesting.
Like a bit, like there was too much. Like it felt like they had that urgency to just cram a bunch of shit in.
It felt like a miniseries, yeah.
Right, like it felt like this was a miniseries that you tried to cram into a movie. Whereas at the same time, I remember at some point I had to stop it and say like, wow, I don't know shit about Namor. But I love, like, actually I do. I looked him up. I love everything about this idea of what they did with basically Atlantis, right? They created it, the world building, right? The part where I was like, oh wow, this is kind of cool. Like they actually created a thing that isn't just, oh, it's Atlantis. Like, no, this is a thing that feels like it lives in the same world as Wakanda and has the same, like a similar energy, but is very different.
Yeah, I mean, narratively, it's set up to be like a parallel, right?
Right. I mean, which I thought was actually really that. I remember thinking the whole time, like, wow, this is cool. Like, I like what they're doing with that, where they like the same kind of stuff we saw in Black Panther 1, we saw it again, but different with Talokan. And I liked that. That was the part I really liked. But why I say I disagree sometimes is that, like, at the same time, there are parts of the movie where I'm like, what is this about? Like, actually, like, why are certain people even in the movie?
Martin Freeman
and Julia Louis-Dreyfus. Like,
yeah.
Right? Like, I actually was
luckily their portion is fairly minor.
It's fairly minor, but that was the part where I'm like, okay, like, just, like, I get you need to put them in the movie to prep for another movie. But, like, yeah, okay, whatever. And not to say that what they did was bad. It just felt like you're not actually part of this movie most of the time.
No.
So, yeah. But I want to, like, for me, I want to talk about it. I want to focus on the contrast. The idea that we see the world of Wakanda in the first movie, and now we see, like, this other world, this other place, Talokan, which is similar in a certain sense, both in the mythology of vibranium and bullshit, but also in the reality of people affected by colonialism.
Yeah, no, and yeah, especially like the climax of the movie is realizing that the effects of colonialism are having these two countries fight each other, right? Like they're being manipulated in a lot of ways by those outside forces into hating each other, when ultimately, as we were talking about, like they're parallels and circumstances cause them to start fighting each other, right? Murder and whatnot. But yeah, it's a powerful statement on global communities, colonialism, capitalism, and does a lot of interesting stuff with it in a superhero context, which I was not expecting, right? I thought it was pretty clever in that regard. But yeah, I agree with you. Like, it's not like I wasn't interested in seeing Namor and his people, but I just didn't have a lot of, touchstones with him. So I didn't know much about the character, so I didn't have like a lot of expectations. But like you're saying, it was what we got to see of it. And unfortunately, I don't feel like we got to see too much of like actual life down there. But what we saw, like you said, it was very evocative and very, very engaging in the similar way to how Wakanda was shown and treated in the first movie. Absolutely. And that being said, I think Namor himself was a really interesting character. And from the few times I've seen his character in the comics, which of course has been when he's interacted with the X-Men, found the character actually, despite the design of him being kind of veering away from the classic comic design and leaning into more, better choices and more interesting choices for the movie, his character is still very authentic to the comics from what I know, where he's kind of not a good guy or bad guy. He's just a guy that's fighting for his people, honestly. And his allegiance doesn't matter. Allegiance in the sort of the walking world, right? The above water world does not really matter to him because everything is secondary to his kingdom.
Right.
And the actor and the writing portrayed that character and that idea very, very well, in my opinion. Yeah.
And I think what I thought really neat, for at least for me, and I don't I'm not an expert on this. I don't care about this, I guess, but I do, was the idea that they took what was essentially Atlantis, like this kind of silly like mythology of Atlantis, which I say silly because a lot of Atlantis is silly. And they said, no, actually, we're going to turn it into this other thing. We're going to go into Mesoamerican mythology, right? And not only is it, he is, now they've made him into a mythological figure essentially, but also so is the place, right? It's not Atlantis, it's Talocan, which is based on an Aztec myth, right?
Right.
So the idea that it becomes this, it's just like Wakanda was Afrofuturism. This is, I don't know if there is actually a concept of, Mesoamerican, whatever.
Right.
But this
there is now.
but just the idea that this kind of parallel idea of another, kind of culture that was essentially dominated by Europeans, and what if they weren't, and what would that be like?
Right. Right. And I think I keep saying they leaned into that stuff a lot in this movie. And I say that because one of the things that really impressed me with it, and I think it really hit me in hindsight when my wife and I were talking about it afterwards, is there's a lot of this movie that's not in English. And, right? Honestly. Which is, again.
Between what? Kosa and I guess, Yucatan Mayan.
Right. Atlantean, sure. No,
but it is actually
I know.
Yucatan Mayan.
Right. But again, we're talking about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, right? Which, is the new modern mainstream action language, right? And here we have a movie in that universe that is, I'm not going to say it's a majority not in English, but there are significant portions of this movie that are not in English at all. And I was really impressed with that commitment, perhaps bolstered by the presence of more multilingual movies. I'm thinking of things like Prey, right. Even, right? Where this is just becoming, and TV shows and stuff are doing this as well, just not shying away from they'll have to read subtitles. No, it's let's celebrate these languages because these characters are not all English speakers.
Right.
Right. And I was really impressed to see a Marvel movie lean into that.
And that, I think for me, that's the part I actually really, I actually really like that part. I like the fact that they went further into things that are different and maybe not something I'm used to or comfortable with,
Right.
But made it interesting and cool. And I guess I'm the kind of guy, or I was the kind of kid that would have watched a movie like this and be like, oh, I want to play games and read books about that. I want more of that fantasy world, which I think is super cool, right? and I'm hoping there are people out there that see that, like, yeah, that was cool. Like, I want to know more about what that was about. Mm-hmm. And to put to put again, Mesoamerican culture, like, kind of indigenous cultures of Central America and Southern North America and South America into focus was cool, right? And to draw parallels with what Wakanda represented, and to say, like, yeah, let's see it from another perspective. Yeah. And then you had Martin Freeman, and you're like, what are you doing here?
I've worked really hard on my American accent, and it's actually pretty good. But I still look at him, I look at his face, and I can only hear a British accent, despite the fact that his American accent is pretty good. Because he's the most British man on the planet, aside from maybe Benedict Cumberbatch. But yeah, that attention to and devotion to those cultures, it was so refreshing, I guess, to see. Again, they're leaning into those cultures through the language that's being spoken, through the seeds of the cultures that they're creating for these these fake countries, but also in like the design, and in design, by that I mean of costumes and accessories and stuff like that, to the point, and there was a point towards the movie when new uniforms and new armor were developed for the Wakandan warriors, and we saw the Moors people come out of the surface and start fighting with each other. And over the course of the movie, as they developed and became more agonistic with each other, or antagonistic with each other, we saw actually sort of the armor design in terms of colors, in terms of textures, started to become actually more, they echoed each other. Like we saw by the end of the movie with the big climactic fight on top of the submarine thing, we saw textures and colors on the Wakandans that are the exact same textures and colors we're seeing on Namor's people. And it just enhanced the thematics of all the stuff we're talking about even more for me. Like, I was just like blown away by clearly how much research, work, and effort went in to the design and creation of this movie that isn't just stuff to look at. It's stuff that enhances the narrative that we're looking at as well. Which, again, speaks to sort of what I was saying earlier. Like, it can seem like a mess of a movie, but man, they are doing so much work here to really elevate what Black Panther is adding to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And because it was so different in terms of design and in terms of story, kept me engaged more than maybe just another origin story would, right? Or honestly, like, and not to kind of push the subject a little astray.
Or a part 2 sequel, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. No, that's the thing
that compared to Iron Man 2.
Right. And that's the thing that kind of stuck with me at the end. Like, this movie is bizarre and kind of weird in terms of shape and story. But I think it's because they lost the main actor, it allowed them to sort of be a little not more loose with what they could do with this sequel, but they had to scramble, right? They had to figure out how to tell a story without Chadwick Boseman,
right?
And they created, as a result, perhaps partly through scrambling, perhaps partly through desperation, perhaps partly through luck, something really unique and clever and special. And what made me sad is, like, this movie wouldn't exist, obviously. I'm gonna say the obvious. This movie wouldn't exist if Chadwick Boseman hadn't died. And then it makes me wonder, like, what would Black Panther 2 be? And the one thing I know is that it wouldn't be this movie if Chadwick Boseman had not died.
Oh, it certainly wouldn't be this movie. Although I feel like, maybe I'm wrong, I think even before his passing, I thought there was already discussion that the second movie was going to feature Namor, right?
Sure.
So I like the idea of the conflict between the people of Talokan and the people of Wakanda. I suspect that was always a plan. Now, what it became and how the stories, turned on, ideas of leadership, ideas of representation of your people, what it means for, Queen Ramonda or Shuri, like what it means to be who they are, the mother and sister of Black Panther, of T'Challa, and how that compares to Namor and his role in his culture. Like, I think that part was actually probably grew out of Chadwick's passing. And I say that because actually one of the things I think about, I joked about, the main actress, being, I guess, kind of being notorious on the internet for, I guess, turning into a bit of an anti-vax, or maybe always being. But I think about the part where when she finally, because of the situation, ends up having to, eat the magic goop or whatever, right? The heart-shaped herb. And the idea that, you see the spirit of the person that like inspires you, or it motivates you, right? And we'd seen that in the previous film where T'Challa sees his father and gets inspiration from. And then, we see now Shuri eat the heart-shaped herb and say, oh, you'll see your mother. You'll see Queen Ramonda, who's just recently passed. And she doesn't, right? Like, she sees Killmonger, and that's the kind of thing.
Absolutely incredible.
That which I joke, I'm like, of course they're going to set her up to be a villain, but just the idea that we see that kind of thing, and that conflict of I could be the person that, when a lot of fans saw the first Black Panther, were like, well, Killmonger wasn't entirely wrong, right?
Right.
So suddenly we're like faced with the like, oh, so is the new Black Panther going to lean into that, right? That's definitely something they couldn't have done. So I think that's the part that I think about, like, that was actually really not a twist, but like a turn I didn't expect.
And like, as you're alluding to, and what we said earlier, without their lead actor, the original lead actor, it made, especially the Wakandan side, much more of an ensemble cast rather than a star-led cast, which was cool in a couple fronts. We got to see these characters that we knew get much more developed, get much more to do than they would otherwise, right? We got to see M'Baku be much more involved. I don't know about much more, but very involved. Get to be a foil to Shuri that maybe would have been done by someone else in the original draft of the movie with
or maybe it would have been M'Baku with T'Challa, but it would have been different. Right.
Exactly, because, and this is, I think, one of the most interesting parts, is that without Chadwick Boseman, ostensibly the lead characters of the movie were two women. It was Shuri and, well, I guess three women, Shuri and Queen Ramonda and Okoye, right? Again, something you don't necessarily see a whole lot in superhero cinema, right? And it was ostensibly about, like, the final two episodes of this miniseries were about Shuri and her character arc, and that was really good. But yeah, it was a real movie led by a cast of women, and including the addition of Riri Williams, right? Mm-hmm. And if this were a Chadwick Boseman led movie, it would have been a movie about dudes fighting each other, right? That his passing allowed us allowed the writer, Ryan Coogler, and his writers and producers pursue a much more unique, interesting, and unexplored path in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So again, it pains me to say, like, that if it were just another Chadwick Boseman Black Panther, we would, as you said, probably get the Namor and scuffle and
we would have seen some of it, but maybe not all of what we saw. Yeah,
not as nuanced. I don't know. It wouldn't have been with the nuance that we got in this movie, and I like the nuance we got in this movie. It would have been a different nuance, right? But much more masculine, much more traditional, I would say, in a lot of ways.
That's fair. I mean, we are talking about the guy that made Creed.
yeah.
Which, I mean, that's a very man movie, right? Like, it's got lots of punching and
Right,
stuff.
lots of punching in muscles, as does this, I guess. But they really took advantage of the opportunity they were given to make something that otherwise would not have been made. And props to Coogler and his crew for doing that.
I mean, and for me, I just need to go back to how much I think what they did with Namor. To the point where, like, when they reveal where his name comes from, I had to pause and laugh because it's silly, but also like, yeah, man, Namor, whatever. But like, no, literally, you are, because like the priest of the whatever said, no, you are Sin Namor, and like, yeah, I'm called Namor, and you're like, oh damn,
that's right? Pretty good, pretty clever,
and just this whole idea that it is, this again another culture very affected by colonialism by Europeans, and just to see like, yeah, like what if we had the same thing but very different, because to me, like, I've done a lot of, I've read a lot of fantasy nonsense, I've played games, I've done whatever, and like the idea that Atlantis has always been this like, oh, it's just Greece but different, because again the Atlantis,
Plato, yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, it comes from Plato, but it was never, there's not a lot of mythology to Atlantis. It was just this idea that grew in the cultural consciousness of like people that live under the ocean, whatever.
Well, a sunken city, a city that hit technological greatness and it's hoisted on its own petard, that stuff, right?
Right, but it turned into this mythology that then again comic books adopted and everything else of it's this underwater society, and like to take that and to turn it into something very different, something that feels, I don't know, like I liked it, and to have to be able to use kind of like the aesthetic of kind of Mesoamerican culture, right? When you see Namor with this look, this like the kind of the plumed headdress and stuff, and all the stuff that's like, yeah, that's cool, right? That's you didn't have to make up some bullshit Atlantis thing. You just took Mayan culture and Aztec culture and turned it into this society that escaped the sword and the blade, or the sword and the bullet of Spain and then later England. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe this is me channeling my Latino heritage a little bit, but like, I mean, I'm like,
every time Namor's on screen, Andrew just stood up and saluted. It was weird.
It's weird. I'm like, yes,
my people.
So yeah.
Let's talk about the important question here. Ankle wings.
Okay, that's the one thing I was like, what? And I get that's a comic book thing. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And actually, I get it, right? He's apparently Marvel's first mutant.
Yeah.
In terms
explicitly says so, yeah, in the movie.
Like, whatever, right? That's great. I actually like the fact that they technically his name isn't Namor. His name is actually, they call him, Kukulkan. Which, again, it's another,
Kukulkan, yeah.
Or
it's a god.
It's the plumed serpent, right?
There we go. Yeah.
So yeah, to me, now it's going to be the thing. If I've ever seen Namor in other stuff, I'm going to be like, "Oof, you mean Namor?" Right? I'm going to be the guy that like wants to correct comic book nerds. Like, I'm sorry, you mean Namor?
And they're like, "Whatever, MCU."
MCU nerd. Yeah. I'm that guy.
Yeah, you've been that guy. Let's be real.
Yeah, that's true.
I wonder how much this will affect or be picked up, especially kind of how things resolve, how that will be picked up and used by other MCU properties. Obviously, it'll probably influence next Black Panther film or the equivalent thereof, but similar to like the end of the Eternals, where like all of a sudden there was no one noticing the gigantic god sticking out of the ocean at this point. They kind of have just kind of ignored what the Eternals did in a lot of ways in other MCU movies. I wonder what there is to pick up and run with for other properties. Can you see any sort of implications for other property? I would guess because of the Martin Freeman and Julia Louis-Dreyfus, but those two characters are really just a commercial for Thunderbolts, right? Right.
And of course, Riri Williams is segueing into her own series, But
Yeah. That's right, on Disney Plus,
yeah.
right? Yeah.
And obviously, no doubt. Well, actually, Okoye, I believe that was also opening the door to her going on a spin-off series or something, right?
Yeah.
As the Midnight Angel, I believe is the character's name.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of and that's actually one of the things that I probably rattles me a little bit, because it's that maybe swinging too wide, although they could just forget about some of it, right? Like, oh, whatever, let's not do that series or that movie or that TV show or that whatever.
Right.
But I mean, who knows? I think right now they've kind of buttoned up the people of Talokan such that they can keep them under wraps until they need them, right? So we maybe won't see Namor for a while.
There is a wonderful shot that is probably going to be the show image for this episode. So if you have seen that, dear listeners, you know what I'm talking about. But in the first 2 episodes of this miniseries, it was Shuri and Okoye kind of going into the mainland, for lack of a better word, right?
To MIT,
and
man.
yeah,
Cambridge.
There's a beautiful shot of them getting out of this this completely inconspicuous car, which is very conspicuous actually. And Okoye is basically wearing like a superhero skin tight suit, but with a blazer. And Shuri's wearing her clearly very expensive sweatsuit. I'm like, this is the superhero chic I need. I'm like, if I design any superhero from here on out, they're definitely getting a blazer on top of their superhero suit, because that's a style. Oh my god, it was amazing.
So I'm going to say that to me, that's a callback to when they went to Korea in the first film, where it's like, how do we dress these people like they think they're inconspicuous, but they absolutely are not.
Right, like Amish on Rumspringa, right?
But yeah, no, it was like I said, I think overall I definitely enjoyed the film. I think it was a bit kind of whatever, but I think what it did for the world, and maybe I'm as I get older, I think world building can be more interesting, and I think just seeing individual characters, even if the overall plot was a bit sometimes suspect or not clear, and then we had to wonder why. And this is the one. Okay, I'm sorry. This is a terrible thing to say, but then you're like, and why are these white people in the movie?
Yeah,
because that was kind of the thing where I get it's setting up for Thunderbolts and stuff, but it was like, okay. And again, actually, in defense of Martin Freeman and Julia Louis-Dreyfus, they're fine. I think they're doing great with the characters they have. But you're like, why do we have 30 minutes of you in a movie that's clearly about this other thing? So anyway, yeah, no, I think it is. I enjoyed it. I did. Is it my favorite movie ever? No, but I'm gonna think about what they did for a while, right? I'm going to think about the world they built, the characters they introduced, and the way they implemented what I think is a kind of dumb-looking character. Well, I'm saying, when I look at the comics...
That's a mutant you're talking about.
When I look at the comics of Namor and all that, I'm like, this is dumb, And no, now I'm like, hey, to me, it reminds me of how... When the DCU wanted to cast Aquaman, and they're like, oh, we're going to go with Jason Momoa, and there was a brief moment where they're like, he's going to be more Polynesian, right? And I'm like, oh, that was cool. And I didn't see the Aquaman movie, and I don't think I need to, from what I've heard. But
spoiler, the good guy wins.
Yeah, but just that kind of idea of let's look to places where this might actually make more sense. This might feel more interesting, other than just being, hey man, someone read Plato in college and had this idea.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'm upset with their interpretation of Namor was they did not, even though they should have, they did not keep him comic accurate with his severe widow's peak. Because you know what? You know what more characters in the MCU need to look like? Dracula.
Which he does.
No, it's interesting because I think because of how different it was and how much more open and kind of unmoored it was in terms of being devoted to the superhero formula, it is probably kind of up there for me in terms of Marvel movies. it's one I could definitely watch again and would gladly do so. Skip through the white people scenes, like you said, but.
So I'm going to say this. I think one of the things I might love about the Black Panther movies, both of them, more than any other Marvel MCU movie, is their costume people. I mean, it's just like, and that's weird because that's not something I thought I'd care about, but like, man, like, you know, in Black Panther 1, it was like, here's all these different, like the 5 tribes of Wakanda and how they're all like, they all look great and they all look,
right,
you know, evocative. And then you find out they're all based on different African, you know, cultural things. And now we see Talokan, and it's like, oh, this is, you know, an Aztec and Mayan thing with, you know, and I'm like, yeah, man, I like this. This is good.
It's one of the things that Nicole was saying, or my wife was saying about the movie, where they were able to create this sort of near future styling of, without it just looking like standard sci-fi. And obviously that's part of the design because of where they are, but it didn't also feel didactic and like, look at this African culture. Haven't we done our research? Isn't this great? Look at this. Look at that. It just is. And it was all just kind of lived in and cohesive to a point that it just felt like another sort of superhero sci-fi world. And it was very believable because of that. And like you said, and like we said earlier, like the design is obviously the result of a lot of research, a lot of dedication and care, that it not only was just stuff to look at, it was also all adding to just the themes and the narrative itself. Mm-hmm. And kind of speaking to that, like going back to Chadwick Boseman, and of course it sucks that he's gone, and he was fantastic in this character, but one of the unintended consequences of his death is that, you know, he represented the symbol of Wakanda in his movie and in the other movies he was a part of, and without the symbol, it became a movie about the culture, and the movie is absolutely a celebration of not only the cultures that they were doing research from, but from this incredibly unique culture they created for this cinematic universe, and really put something on display that I would say, in some sense, otherwise was beneath the shadow of the hero at the front of it all. But when you kind of, with him gone, it allowed them to shine a light on this incredibly unique and interesting and powerful world and culture that they created. To put it succinctly, I would say the backdrop became foreground, and hopefully is used much more as the MCU goes forward.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like, I think what they've done is pretty. I suspect that the third movie, I mean, if you consider this more of an Empire Strikes Back, they need to have something in a third movie, if they do one, that addresses kind of the things they've set up, right? Like I was gonna say, part of me is like, oh, what other culture can they introduce? Like, no, this doesn't need to be a, you know,
right.
This isn't the oppressed, the colonized people movie series. It's like, really they've got the two, and again they set them up very much in a parallel contrast,
right? If anything, it kind of feels like they've set it up so that Wakanda and Talokan, right? They're like, okay, we've set these up for a moment, but for now we can put them on the back burner as we do our multiverse bullshit, right? It feels like phase 7 that they're setting up with this because of the whole sort of monologue at the end, or sorry, not monologue, but discussion that Namor has with Namora, and how he's like, hey, this is all political, right?
No, and I think that's fair. This is it can sit there and simmer while all the other things go and do their thing, and then come back if assume they want to do it, where it comes back and becomes an issue. Yeah. And we've got T'Challa 2.0 as well. So, you know. Sorry, that's the most unexpectedly what the fuck end credit sequence I've seen in a while. I mean, it's not bad. It was just like, oh, okay, I get you have to acknowledge everything, but I was just like, oh, okay, so this is just some poor kid who's never going to be in this movie again because he's going to age out.
I don't want to judge a child actor at all, but like every time that kid was just, the only thing I could see is like, he's not acting. He's just, all I saw on his face was like, I'm in a fucking Marvel movie. Right. This is dope.
I'm in a movie, right? Like,
he's just looking between these two actors. He's got the biggest smile on his face. He's like, this is awesome.
My name's not Toussaint. It's T'Challa. Like, all right, kid. You go.
Good for him, man.
Good
Own
for
the
him.
moment.
I love
Own
when they
the
recast him as some actor in 10 years, someone else.
Right.
Like,
it shows up at Tony Stark 2.0's funeral. So if you, dear listeners, have any thoughts about the topics we discussed this week, feel free to leave your thoughts as comments on the page for this episode at forallintense.net.
You can also post your comments or engage in conversations with other listeners on our Facebook page.
You can find us on other social media as well. Both Andrew and I occupy specific social media platforms to meet your needs. You can find me on Instagram at dbethelcomics. You can find Andrew on Mastodon at profounddark@dice.camp.
While you're at our website, forallintense.net, you can also take a look at our YouTube page, which you may already be at because we are rebroadcasting the show on the YouTubes. If you are there, please like and subscribe, or as they like to say, ring the bell.
These two tracks of music for our show, one is called Disco Medusae, the other is called District 4, both written and performed by Kevin McLeod, the Clan McLeod, immortal swordsman, graph paper enthusiast, and musician extraordinaire.
You can find his music at incompetech.filmmusic.io, and that's all licensed under the Creative Commons 4.0 attribution license.
If you like the show and like to help us out, the best way to do so would be to subscribe to the show using whichever podcasting service you happen to use. What would help us out even more, though, would be to leave some sort of review, whether a text review or using the proprietary metric will help spread the word to new potential listeners through the magic of algorithms. So, Andrew, you ready for the big game this week? I think there's a big game this weekend. I'm not sure.
I'm playing Pathfinder. Yeah.
Yep. The only reason why I realized the Super Bowl was this weekend was because of the news that they're releasing the next episode of The Last of Us on Friday instead of its normal day on Sunday because they don't want to compete with the Super Bowl.
Oh, okay.
That's the only reason why I knew there was a Super Bowl this weekend.
I'm just really excited because, last year at the Super Bowl, Matt Damon was in a commercial for Crypto.com. And I'm really excited to see him come back and do a second commercial to remind people that, where things have gone. Like, had you, he said, the future favors the bold, I think it was. That was the whole advert, right? And I've read, right? Like, if you'd invested $100 when Matt Damon told you to, you'd have about $1.05. Right?
Same cost as freedom, which is interesting.
And so it's just like I want to see all these crypto companies advertise.
Well, actually, no, he isn't an ad this year. It's actually strange. It's called apology.com, and it's just a place where you can go to apologize for all the bad choices you made as an actor just in the commercials you starred in. That was a bad joke.
No, but I mean, there's a lot of actors that go to that website. So
I know it's a very. You know what? I go to that website all the time. Mm-hmm. God, is there an apology.com? We are not endorsing apology.com.
God, find out it's like a weird porn site or something.
So until you need to apologize, dear listeners. Nothing. Our listeners have nothing to apologize for. So until you celebrate the big game in whatever manner you choose, dear listeners, I'm D. Bethel.
And I'm Andrew Asplund.
And for all intents and purposes,
that was a podcast.
At least I didn't buy an Asus monitor.
It's Asus. Actually, I remember one guy who called it Asus. I was like, oh, okay.
Our Lord and Savior.
I mean, if you want to pronounce it that way. Wizards of the sad California drylands. Right? Like, that's a desert that kills you. Yet they built a fucking city that attracts more tourists than, whatever, right?
Don't forget there's a part of California literally called Death Valley.
Wakanda Forever with the weird lady that hates vaccine.
Yep. You want coffee that tastes like you just left it on the counter.
Right, like I'm in like the danger zone of coffee. Like either cold or hot. A-okay. 70 degrees, pour it down the drain.
Black Panther 3, Andrew. I want to hear your speculations. Go.
Oh, I got nothing. It's just gonna be Martin Freeman for 2 hours.
I know. It's like, you know what? This needs more Martin Freeman.
More. They're gonna bring back Andy Serkis. It's just gonna be the two Tolkien white guys.
You're fired.
I mean,
so those Tolkien white guys are episode title now?
I do.
Oh, probably not for this episode. Jesus.
Yeah, I know it's not.